All right, let's go over some problems from 7.3. And keep in mind that to find R, you just take, when you have adjacent terms, you just divide the second term by the first term. So I'm going to show you this one because this one is not geometric. And the reason it's not geometric is when you do this and you take 1/3 divided by 1/2, this would reciprocate to here and make 2/3. And clearly, I did not multiply this by 2/3. Like 1/2 divided by 2/3 is 2/6, which is a third, but 1/3 times 2/3 is not a fourth. So this one is a no. And when it is a no, these don't matter, right? They're not applicable, so to speak. So you would not need to fill them in. I don't know. I don't like leaving things blank, so you could just say not applicable or no formula or something. But when it does work, like this one, you just divide A2 divided by A1. And if I give you a decimal, you can give me a decimal. And so once you have that decimal, you can tell me it has an R. This is A1. And please recognize this word of convergence, which used to be decay. Divergent used to be growth. It is important to understand that for when you do 7.3. So after that, if you want to find a term, you just plug in 5 and use Desmos or something, calculator. But when you have recursive, right, I'll show you how to do number 6 real quick with Desmos. So if I take Desmos and I type in, please make sure you're in the graphing calculator and not in the scientific calculator. So you would do 16 times 1/8, okay, and then you would raise that to whatever power minus 1. So it'd be 5 minus 1 or 4, and then you would want to toggle the fraction. So you do have to click on it twice. So the answer to number 6 is 1/256. Make sure you're toggling this and giving me a fraction if I give you a fraction. So here, when we have a recursive means to use the term before. I'm going to zoom in on that one. And so if I'm looking at number 7 here, what happens is to find A2, I use A3 in here because this means term before. So I write down the formula, -2 plus 3, and in the parentheses, I put the term before. I do this calculation, -6 plus 3 is -3. To find A3, I use this in the formula. I get 6 plus 3, which is 9. To find A4, I use 9 in the formula. To find A5, I use -15. And same thing over here. If I'm going to do this one, again, I just think of this thing as being in a parentheses. So A1 I write down. To go to A2, I put 3 into here. 5 times 3 minus 4 is 11. To find A3, I put 11 in. 55, 5 times 11 is 55, minus 4 is 51, and I keep going. So another one that was frequently asked was these two, especially considering some of the problems have 2 blanks. So what's going on there? Well, to do this problem, you're going to do this one divided by that one. It is kind of a mess, so you might want to type that in the Desmos, or you can type the whole thing in the Desmos. But you end up getting, right, so if I were to reduce this a little, you end up getting 4, and let's type that in the Desmos and see what we get with that train wreck. And you do get some really, honestly, some nutty size numbers, and the whole point of this is so you can learn how to use a calculator or Desmos. So if I want to simplify that, don't ever trust this decimal. If you click this twice, it tells you it's 1/256. And then the 4th root of 1/256 is a 4th. Now, remember that when you take a root, it could be plus or minus. And so that's why there's 2 blanks. We assume that we multiply by a 4th and get 125 and 25 fourths and then 25 sixteenths. But what if it's negative a 4th? It would then be 400, -100, +25, -25 fourths, and then back to positive. So if there are 3 blanks and you take a root, you need to understand that there could be 2 answers, and the SOL loves the second answer. So does the SAT. They love to make you know that it could be negative and not always positive. So what do you do if you get something crazy with all these decimals? Just use decimals. I just typed this whole thing in the Desmos, right? I just went to Desmos. Please make sure you're using the graphing calculator for Desmos, not the scientific. And I just went in here and typed it in, right? I went to the root, which is under functions, miscellaneous root. I put in here 5, because 6 minus 1 is 5, and then 9.375, and then I divided that by 3.072, and I got 1.25. If you want to turn it into a fraction, you can. You could say that's 5/4, or you can use 1.25 and just multiply it all these times. You may use decimals. So when I look at number 15, I have a similar problem, but instead of laying it out, like this, what they do instead is they give it to me where they tell me the terms. So I'm going to take my 8th term and divide it by my 4th term, and then subtract that. So I get 4. Divide this, you get 81. R is 3. But I can't complete the problem because the problem wants me to do the explicit rule. I only know the 3. So to find the term, I need to use the term formula. Keep in mind that A means term, any term for AN. So I write down AN equals A1 R to the N minus 1. Please make sure you don't accidentally write the arithmetic one. The AN equals A1 plus N minus 1 times D. There is no D. This is an R problem. So once I put that in there, I'm going to use A4. I could have used A8. And I'm going to put my R is 3. And then I'm going to put this 4. Remember, this 4 is this 4. So I reduced this and typed it in the Desmos. 3 to the 3rd power is 27. I'm now solving. Also remember that there's a multiplication sign here. So I divided by 27 to get A1. And yeah, A1's kind of a mess. But I don't need to do anything with it other than just write it down. So please put the formula. You have A1 R to the N minus 1. Make sure for your recursive, you're writing down A1 is 8/27. AN is 3 times the term before, because that's what that means. And to find A15, you are just going to put, 15 into the explicit. So I'll do that on Desmos. There is a lot of learning how to use a calculator in this chapter. Always has been. It's not new with Desmos or anything. In the old days, we just had to use calculators. So we'd have 3, and then up here, we would raise it to the 15 minus 1. It's just so much easier to write 14, and we get 1,417,176. Now, I had a couple students ask me about this one over here because they got a scientific notation problem. This problem was pretty easy to set up because, A1 is just 12 and R is just -4. But when they got this scientific notation, it made them a little freaked out. Yeah, sometimes the answer is in scientific notation. So when you type this into Desmos and you get a really big number, that's completely acceptable. And so then our last one that we need to go over is number 16. And this was unintentionally complicated, but it proves something very important, is that even though this is in a decimal, right, and I type it in, I did exactly what I did up here. I just typed it in. You get a repeating decimal here. So when we look at decimals on this, and this is just a really important thing to remember about fractions and decimals. When I type in 5 minus 2, or 3rd root of 2.25, divided by -60.75, I get this repeating decimal. And repeating decimals have to be turned into fractions. You have to. Because if I take 0.33 and use it over here, then my A1 will be wrong. So even though this is a decimal, the R has to be a fraction because it's repeating. When I plug it in, and I picked the positive term, I could have picked A2 and used negative, but I picked the positive term because positives are less likely to create errors. And I put 2.25 in for A5, and then here I put in my R of -1/3. The 5 here, so just as a reminder, one more time, this 5 goes here too, right? Those are all the same 5. And so I typed in the calculator -1/3 raised to the 4th. I'll show you that real quick. So -1/3 raised to the 4th power is this crazy decimal, which is actually, toggle it to 1/81st. And so the way you get rid of 1/81st is multiply by 81/1. It will cancel here, right? So this cancels. And then over here, when I multiply by 81/1 here, I get this A1. And you can keep that as a decimal or write it as a fraction. Since it is terminating, I left it as a decimal, and I put it right here. Actually, no, I turned it into a fraction. That's funny. I must have changed it between classes. So you can use either one. You can use that one, or you can use this one, and then make sure you have R as a 3rd. The recursive is pretty easy now because you know A1 and R. Well, I hope this helps, and thank you for watching.